Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
The big news in the world of politics: complete and total endorsement for Speaker Mike Johnson. That, according to Donald Trump, taking to Truth Social and changing the course of the day here. We started the day by wondering if Mike Johnson had the votes to keep the gavel on Friday when the new Congress begins. It appears we may have an answer to that question now. And with us at the table, none other than Denver Riggleman, the former Republican congressman from Virginia, with us in person. Always a treat to see you. Hope your holidays are well.
Oh, great.
You're a happy guy because you're not doing this anymore, right?
It's absolutely ebullient. Is that a word? E-B-U? Yeah, but no,
Ebullient,
ebullient.
yes.
Yeah, I'm ebullient. Yes.
I like that. It's a nice place to start. I suspect that Mike Johnson is kind of feeling that way as well. Jim Comer, just this morning, was calling around the 20 people who helped to dispatch Kevin McCarthy to say, hey, you got to get on board with Mike Johnson. I guess the job's been done.
I don't think so.
No?
I didn't work out for McCarthy that well. And, when you think about it. And also, when you look at people like the Chip Roys, the Tom Masseys, the Andy Harrises, they drink their own bathwater. They don't really drink Trump's bathwater.
That doesn't sound good.
No, it doesn't. But I think, a lot of people call the Freedom Caucus the Trump Protection Caucus. But in reality, there are people there that are very idealistic, right? They're ideologues. And they're also going to do their own thing. And their districts are relatively safe. So as we get closer to the midterms, if things aren't tracking the way they want based on their ideology, based on what they're looking at as far as the deficit and the debt, you could see some issues. And I think there are going to be some arguments. I don't think it guarantees Mike Johnson the speakership at all. I think if you look at Chip Roy, I think people forget Chip Roy certified the election. And Chip, was Freedom Caucus, and he went against most of the Freedom Caucus to do that. So I think, again, people need to realize, yes, Trump does control the party almost completely, but you do have people like the Chip Roys and the Thomas Masseys that are going to do what they're going to do.
Well, so if there's no guarantee that Mike Johnson is the speaker, then the Congress cannot begin, right? You have to have the speaker to swear in the Congress, then the lawmakers. There's also this thing coming down the pike called the inauguration.
That's happening, yeah.
There's also going to be a former president lying in state on January 9th. Can any of that happen if we don't have a speaker?
I think as far as with the former president, I think that absolutely does happen. But as far as, the multiple rounds of a speaker right at the beginning of the Congress, I think it would be interesting because how many Republicans are going to be sitting, 219 or 220? So say you have 3 or 4. They're like, we don't want to do this right now. We're going to demand some things.
Then you need Democrats.
There's not going to be one Democrat that votes for Mike Johnson for speaker. Absolutely
That's what Hakeem
not.
Jeffries says.
Not one. It's not going to happen. And I think that at this point, when we see what's already happening, what they call the MAGA Civil War and things like that's happening right now, it's going to be very interesting to see how that does pan out. You know what the first day of Congress is like. You've done this. They bring the kids. They're singing songs together, right? The big swearing, it's rah-rah. Everyone feels great. That's supposed to be the one day you feel good about your job in Washington. What's it going to be like this time? It's going to be miserable. Miserable. When I swore in, it was that long 4 to 5 hour wait. Remember, it was coming over from the Republican to the Democratic Congress when I came in. It was a long, miserable day for me. It wasn't really ebullient. But I think it's going to be a miserable day. I think you're going to have a lot of votes. And I think... So it's going to be many rounds, either way, you see. I think it might be, but it depends on, again, if Comer can convince people. I hope he does a better job than convincing people in the Oversight Committee. But if he does a halfway decent job in convincing people, maybe it's easy. But I think they actually have to ramp up their lobbying efforts pretty hard to get everybody on board. Just to elect a speaker, not even pass a piece of legislation. Just to elect a speaker. Legislation's going to be a shit show. I mean, it's well, you can't say that. No, it's okay. Let me ask you about something else coming January 6th. This is of personal import to you because you were an advisor on the January 6th committee. You also lived through that madness. I just wonder what you make of the fact that no one's talking about it. It is, it's something. 4 years later, you would think this would be a big deal. This should be the biggest deal, is what happened on January 6th. I honestly don't foresee Harris supporters storming the Capitol, coming in for January 6th. But this should be a huge deal. And I think part of it, I wonder a little bit, and I'm not trying to be self-deprecating or humble brag or anything, if I haven't done enough based on the data that we saw. And we still knew that, years, 2 to 3 years after we really thought we'd see more in action when it came to actually criminal I would say, charges against certain individuals. We had phone records, we had text records. Those are at the archives or wherever they're nested right now. But I have to tell you, to me, it's the most important thing. It's the way that I voted was because of January 6th. It's what I've seen. It's why I wrote my book. It's why I started my new company. Everything had to do with what I saw was the lack of resourcing, lack of technology, the fact we couldn't get what we needed to get. But the other good side of that was we had enough to identify some of the real bad actors at the command and control level. But I have to tell you, I think people want to forget. And I think it should be something we remember every January 6th. But again, it's a little surprising to me because for me, it's one of the most important things to happen in American history.
People want to forget. Isn't that interesting? Whether you are fond of what happened that day or not, I mean, do Democrats want to forget that because it's a difficult memory? I
think it was hard for them to run on it. I don't think they could actually verbalize specifically why January 6th was so important, which shocked me. Because for me, I can verbalize it pretty easily. As you know, we've talked about it before. Sure. But I wonder if America is on the psychiatric couch, right? And they're like, do you remember? They're like, January 6th, 2021, what happened that day? But it is really incredible to me. I think we need to actually bring that more to the forefront. And I think we need to revisit why that happened, the disinformation. Right, and the fact that 1 in 5 Americans don't read below the 6th grade level, I believe that's correct, and we have to look at education and things that happen. But why did people sack the Capitol based on fantasy?
It's not going to happen again this time around.
Not that I see.
Legislation would also prevent this from being a matter the vice president needs to worry about.
That's right. Correct.
So, what happens when all of the January 6th offenders are pardoned? Is that something Donald Trump does?
I think
in the outset?
I think they'll say they'll go case by case, but I think they're going to pardon, I would say, a majority of the January 6th, those who are convicted. I wonder about those who actually beat law enforcement. It's going to be very difficult, I think, when you do these type of pardons. How do you actually explain away those that you pardon that actually, physically assaulted Capitol Police? I know them. Many that were there, and I do wonder how that's going to pan out.
It's been suggested that he leaves the biggest offenders right where they are.
That
this wouldn't be a blanket pardon. Do you believe they go case by case through this matter? We're talking about a lot of people here, Denver.
I think they're going to set a minimum threshold, and they're not going to go case by case on that threshold. Okay. If it was people who just trespassed, I think they'll just pardon them.
Done.
Yeah, carte blanche. And for those who did the more serious things, it does bother me if they do get out. And I'm not for any pardons on the J6 individuals, but it's very difficult because it seems every president pardons people that I never would.
There's been talk of preemptive pardons here from Joe Biden. I always hear the name Liz Cheney, then you hear Adam Kinzinger. Yeah. How about Denver Riggleman?
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly had some threats, and there's a possibility I'm subpoenaed, right? As we saw Barry Loudermilk's 128-page report, which I actually read. I know it's crazy. I read it, but it's ludicrous. Right, and Barry had, I know Barry. They have I guess they made some points on the defense of the Capitol and some of those breakdowns. They were correct. But going after Liz Cheney, saying somehow she was meddling that way is just ludicrous. It's absolutely what Donald Trump wanted the committee to do. But I think as far as a preemptive pardon, I don't want one.
You don't?
I don't. I'd rather fight.
Why?
Because I think people need to stand up and. If you want, and I know there's some people who I would say, with Liz and even with Adam, maybe a preemptive pardon works in their favor. It's up to them to have that. But for me, I'd rather the bar fight right now.
The bar fight?
Yeah, I'd rather that. I mean, it's how I was raised. I didn't have a political career.
You do run a distillery.
I do run a distillery. We do make whiskey, and I do have an AI company, too. And so I also pretty good with data. So if they want somebody who makes whiskey and goes after bad people with data up in Congress, who's a former congressman, I'm happy to oblige.
You're going to get lunch with Elon to talk about this?
Oh, you know what? I would have lunch with Elon. I would tell him to stop posting, gobshite, right? And, and I think a lot of that has to do with, the things that he's doing. But, yeah, I'd have lunch with Elon and tell him what I thought.
What's going on with Elon Musk here? We're already seeing a little bit of a breakdown over the H-1B situation. The MAGA versus Musk situation seems tenuous. Will a year or two from now, will he still have the president's ear?
No.
No.
No. I mean, the thing about H-1B is what's interesting, he's going against some really big PACs on the far right, like Numbers USA and things like that. But for me, I'm an H-1B, H-2A, and H-2B supporter based on our district's very rural. But we also have a lot of technology in Virginia and the Commonwealth. And, I mean, that's why I'm starting an exploratory committee to run for statewide office is because of those type of issues. So, those are the type of things, that excite me.
Well, hold on. because I always reserve the last minute or two of our conversations to ask you that last thing that, you may or may not want to answer.
Right.
Because whether you get a pardon or not, will you have a political future?
I didn't have one before when I won accidentally. So, but I think.
Would you like to have a political future?
I think I would rather try to change the dynamic of the two-party system that seems to, ran as a Republican. I got to be behind the door with Trump. I was Republicans for Harris. And the things that I saw, on either side, which a lot of people say actually frightened me based on special interest. It always has when I got into politics, not till the age of about 46, 47. So, yeah, I have a lot of issues because I have individuals. I say a lot of issues. There's probably going to be the soundbite people play, but I have a lot of responsibilities, right? Fiduciary responsibilities for my companies. But that's why we started an exploratory committee, because I think there needs to be somebody who's willing to drag the axe and tell the truth, regardless if there's an R or D behind people's names. And that's why we're looking at. There's a lot of people, who've asked me. They don't have to force me. Nobody's going to force me to do anything. But it was interesting to see the amount of support I had just for an exploratory committee.
Lieutenant governor.
Well, maybe that, or who knows? Statewide office.
Would you run the state of Virginia?
I don't know if I could that's why we're looking at conflicts of interest and stuff like that, but lieutenant governor is absolutely a possibility.
There you have it from Denver Riggleman. Fascinating. You would not be running as a Republican, though, right?
No. Or a Democrat.
Which party or a Democrat?
No,
Start
I'd be
your own
running as
party.
Denver frickin' Riggleman.
The gentleman from Virginia. It's always great to see you here at the table. Happy New Year. Thanks for coming
Happy
over.
New Year. Thanks.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. We did hear from Joe Biden. He's in St. Croix, of course, for the holidays, addressed the nation upon the news of Jimmy Carter's death. Let's listen.
America and the world, in my view, lost a remarkable leader. What I find extraordinary about Jimmy Carter, though, is that millions of people all around the world, all over the world, feel they lost a friend as well, even though they never met him. And that's because Jimmy Carter lived a life measured not by words, but by his deeds.
I want to add the voice of Andra Gillespie, Associate Professor of Political Science at Emory University, a frequent voice on this program. Professor, it's great to see you. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. There are so many comparisons. We've been hearing them since before Jimmy Carter went into hospice to the Biden administration. Donald Trump himself, who today had some nicer things to say about Jimmy Carter, constantly making that comparison. Was it fair?
I think in some ways people are going to sort of use them as parallels because of their relatively short terms. But Jimmy Carter and Joe Biden have different things. When Joe Biden became president of the United States, he came with decades of Washington experience. And I think as we look to see what the legislative impact of his policy agenda was, it's going to look different, though it's going to be substantial, as was President Carter's. President Carter came in as an outsider. He's coming in off of the heels of Watergate. He came in to set a new tone to try to help to restore trust in American institutions that have been ravaged by the mistakes that President Nixon had made. And I think, the thing that's really going to distinguish President Carter from President Biden is his post-presidency. So, looking at the actuarial tables, Joe Biden isn't going to have the type of post-presidency that Jimmy Carter had. But Jimmy Carter was able to build upon the record that I think was unheralded while he served in office, but he was able to build on that record to have, the gold standard for post-presidencies. And part of that was because he was voted out of office. He was in his mid-50s and he had a long life. And so he had a long time to be able to cultivate a legacy around the world of helping to promote democracy, eradicate disease, promote peace.
The longest lived former president in American history. He certainly used the time. To your point, Professor, how has that changed the way we look at his actual presidency? Because everything you hear today, including the statement from Donald Trump, well, I didn't agree with this, or I didn't think he made the right decision here as president, but he went on to convince me that he was a great patriot and that he was to be trusted.
Yeah, I think that was very gracious of incoming President Trump. But it's also just the consistency and the integrity with which he lived his life. I think that that's probably going to be his greatest legacy. I think people forget that in 1976, people were still reeling from Watergate. There were concerns, about corruption. Jimmy Carter presenting himself as a Baptist school teacher and a born-again Christian. And, even though it was maligned at the time, the type of person who really did try to live out his faith was something that was supposed to be a refreshing reversal, of course, for the United States. When he was in office, he was often accused of hectoring. So when we talk about the energy crisis, his admonitions to Americans to turn down the thermostat and put on a sweater were not necessarily particularly well received. But, when we think, about what he was saying this all in good faith. And, even though he was voted out of office in 1980, when he's continuing to live that life and to live it consistently and to try to live out his faith as best as he could, I think people saw the genuineness. And, and that also manifested itself in terms of the causes that they took up. So looking for diseases that people weren't thinking about that affected people in the developing world, going after the most vulnerable, helping to amplify the efforts of Habitat for Humanity. This is a person who kind of, really tried to walk the talk and to live out his faith in a really exceptional way. And I think that that's part of the reason why so many people had so much respect for him.
The Camp David Accords, I think, would be considered a pretty remarkable success for any presidency, even if that was the only thing he had to show for it. But of course, he had the Iranian hostage crisis that so many people remember just as strongly, in fact, more in some cases here. He said in 2015, I was really taken by this, Professor, one of the big regrets he had in his life when asked if he had any. He said, quote, "I wished I'd sent one more helicopter to get the hostages. We would have rescued them, and I would have been reelected." Is that true?
So I would leave that up to my diplomatic historians to say that, but I think you always think of what you could do to help ease suffering for people, and that certainly was a hallmark of President Carter's life. The truth is that there is sort of the symbol of the hostages coming home as Ronald Reagan is being inaugurated into office, and so there certainly is a certain political centering and symbolism there that one wished you could have avoided, and certainly the inability to be able to get the hostages home sort of contributed to this perception in some instances, and I think, in hindsight was undeserved, that President Carter was feckless. And so that contributing to, the stagnating economy at the time and the energy crisis certainly, made people feel a certain type of malaise that I think we're familiar with today. And I think the lesson of Carter, and perhaps 20 years from now, the lesson of Joe Biden is we shouldn't necessarily make decisions about presidents based on how we feel in the moment or based on short-term calculations.
Well, boy, that's a professor talking if there ever was one. You're talking to a journalist here. Be careful. Andra Gillespie. Can we remind our listeners and viewers, by the way, that he never used the word malaise in the so-called malaise speech? How did that happen?
So I defer to the historians about that, but it's not certainly the first time that a word kind of captures the zeitgeist, even if it wasn't directly said by,
It gets back to the first draft of history, though, doesn't it? You don't always believe the analysis or don't always fully invest yourself in the analysis that you're hearing in real time, I think is the point that you're making, and I'll try to underscore here. In our remaining 2 moments, Professor, talk to me about the relationship that Jimmy Carter had with Atlanta, the fact that he went back the way that he did, and then, of course, staged a post-presidency that reinvented them all in his hometown.
Well, this is something that I've certainly benefited from. So he, lived in Plains, but he set up his presidential library at the Carter Center, which has a connection to Emory University, where I work. President Carter was on the faculty, so every year, as long as he was physically able to do so, he gave a convocation to all of our freshman students. It was certainly a treat to be able to attend one of those events. All of the freshmen had to attend. President Carter made himself available to faculty. He would invite you to lunch. He would also inform you if he was going to teach your class. And so I remember getting that email one year telling me President Carter is coming to your class on such and such a day. And, my one regret from that, I learned from a colleague who had that happen to her a couple of years later, is that I didn't video record that lecture. But the things that he said in that lecture in my class, I still repeat to my students, even more than a decade later.
That's really wonderful. I'm glad you could share that memory with us. Andra Gillespie, thank you so much, Professor. It's good to see you from Emory University, of course, in Atlanta.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Thanks for being with us on the Monday edition of Balance of Power as we add the voice of Ashley Davis, the Republican strategist. Of course, you've heard from many times on this program with a slightly different take on things today as we consider the legacy of a Democratic president. She's, of course, founding partner Westfront Strategies. Great to see you, Ashley. I hope you're having a great holiday season. And we'll get to Jimmy Carter. I just wonder your thoughts on what's going on in the House here. Did Mike Johnson just close the deal? Is he a made man?
Well, first of all, Happy New Year, and I wish I was with you in person. I'm in cold weather right now, but I actually think it helps him a lot. Obviously, the president-elect understands that if he wants to get his agenda done or actually get anything done in the first 100 days of his administration, that we have to have a House in place right away. And Speaker Johnson is the one that would do the best job in regards to not having chaos of an election. And I mean, how many times did it take for McCarthy to get the first time 11 or 13? I forget the number right now. Yeah. But, the only other name, as Stephanie was saying, names do pop up. The only other name that I think would kind of appease some of these conservatives on the right, which there aren't that many, but you don't need that many to upend his speakership, is Jim Jordan. And he has said several times that he is not going to run against Speaker Johnson. So I do think that President Trump coming out today was a huge win for them, but I also think it's self-serving because it's not going to help President Trump to have chaos going into his new administration.
Well, Mike Lawler agrees with you. The Republican from New York was on ABC this week, asked about this very matter. Ashley, here's what he said.
Mike Johnson inherited a disaster when Matt Gaetz and several of my colleagues teamed up with 208 Democrats to remove Kevin McCarthy, which will go down as the single stupidest thing I've ever seen in politics. With that said, removing Mike Johnson would equally be as stupid.
That's quite a statement, I have to admit. Ashley, do you agree with it?
Yeah, I would probably not use as extreme words, but it wasn't smart, and it's not going to be smart again. I mean, and if you look at this is like Chip Roy. I'll be interesting to hear what Congressman Fleischmann says to you. You said he's coming up next because he's obviously considered a conservative member, but not a destructionist. So I'm assuming he thinks it's a good idea moving forward, Speaker Johnson stay in place.
Not a destructionist. Fascinating use of that word. Ashley, I want to ask you about the big debate that's broken out over immigration here. And I'm not referring to border security. I'm referring to actual legal immigration. People who watch this program know that you have a long history in the national security space and helped to bring about the Department of Homeland Security. And this idea of H-1B visas suddenly being extremely controversial as a component of this border issue is really interesting. Elon Musk, of course, suggesting that we lift the cap on these H-1Bs, bring in foreign-based talent to help us, particularly in high tech. But that runs counter to what a lot of the MAGA world thinks ought to be happening when it comes to the border and America first. How do you square this from where you're sitting?
Yeah, I think that this is totally getting combined into one conversation that really shouldn't be, because the visas that Elon and Vivek are speaking about, the HB1, they're actually legal visas that are sponsored by companies and corporations to bring talent in. And the MAGA side of the party and many others, not just MAGA, that are concerned about border security, in my mind, are people that are coming over here illegally. So I really think it's important to split the topic up, because that one does not have anything to do with the other one. You have 65,000 available HB1 visas every year to apply to, and you get a 3-year that visa lasts 3 years, and you have actually one more chance to extend it another 3 years. But otherwise, it's not that people are coming across the border illegally, staying here, and not being able to be found. And then obviously the ones that commit crimes that are here as well. So it's a different program. So I do agree with Elon and Vivek on this, and I guess the president
Duly noted. But now that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy have kicked the nest on this. We have an active debate going on over work visas, whether they're skilled or not. And Donald Trump was talking about dreamers in the only interview he's done since being elected as something that he would work with Democrats on. So it sounds to me, Ashley, like just shutting down the border is not enough. Is the answer not comprehensive immigration reform?
I think that comprehensive immigration reform, I mean, in 2007 was the closest that ever was becoming true to reality when Senator Kennedy and then President Bush almost did strike a deal. I think that a win for President Trump is in this first year right away, which is why I think reconciliation will happen. I think there's two buckets that will happen per your earlier conversation with Stephanie. I think they'll do border first along with energy. But the reason why is if you get the 1 million illegal immigrants that are in this country out of the country the first year that have committed a crime or have completely exhausted their appeal process. That's 1 million people that can go out right away, which is a huge win for Trump. So if he does that and then work slowly over the next 3 years trying to find and round up all these other people that have come over here illegally, I think that's going to be phase 2. But if you deal with HB1 visas or if you deal with dreamers, I mean, that's in my mind is stage 3, 4, 5. You've got to get rid of these top ones first and second that have committed crimes in this country.
Rick Davis's ears are burning after I said comprehensive immigration reform as we spent time with Ashley Davis. I haven't asked you about Jimmy Carter. Ashley, what do you make of the constant comparisons, by the way, not just today, but for the balance of Joe Biden's administration being compared to Jimmy Carter? Is that fair?
No, I think, listen, I said this before on my show. President Bush, my boss, used to always say, let history make its decision on what I've done. And I think that Jimmy Carter will go down in history as and even yesterday when he passed away, there's many people that believe in many things that he did. I think during the campaign when people were criticizing President Biden, they were giving him obviously an insult saying that President Carter never did anything to this country. What you said earlier and what Stephanie said in regards to President Trump giving his condolences, being part of this club is a very lonely club. And I think that there are many people country that do respect this. You see that the funeral will be on January 9th. Obviously, the stock market will be closed. Does that mean you get off on the 9th, Joe?
I don't think so. We're going to call you to join us, actually.
But I think that it was more of an insult to President Biden than it was, to go back to your question, than it actually was about Jimmy Carter. He'll go down in history of maybe making some mistakes, but also doing some good things.
Do you think that Trump's statement about Jimmy Carter was more of an insult to Joe Biden? Is that what you're suggesting?
During the campaign, when he was being compared to Jimmy Carter, the statement that he made yesterday, I thought was very appropriate.
Well, so what's the lesson here? And, I always save the easy question for last when we're out of time, Ashley. But I keep hearing from people, Democrats and Republicans, who say, you know what? The lasting impression is that he had dignity, that people trusted his word, that he was a nice guy. What am I supposed to take from that in this age in Washington?
Well, I mean, obviously there's lots of criticism, but I'm reading this book right now, actually, of talking about all the various presidents that have gone down and saying there wasn't integrity or there wasn't, they weren't patriotic enough. I mean, how many people hated Ronald Reagan that now the entire Republican Party runs on being Ronald Reagan-esque? So I think, again, this to me goes back on time heals a lot of wounds and a lot of memories are short.
How true. Joining us live from the Matterhorn, Ashley Davis, founding partner, Westfront Strategies. It's great to see you, Ashley. Happy New Year, and we'll see you in 2025 because we're going to have a lot to talk about.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington, where we do have breaking news on the new Congress, or so we think we do. In any other world, this would be a deal closer, and it may well be in this case as the president-elect Donald Trump throws his complete I believe, total and complete, as he termed it, endorsement behind Mike Johnson and his bid to be the Speaker of the House in the new Congress, something we want to discuss, among other issues, with the gentleman from Tennessee. Republican Congressman Chuck Fleischmann is with us right now live on Bloomberg TV and radio as he prepares to make tracks back to the nation's capital. Congressman, it's good to see you. I hope you had a great Christmas, and I hope you're on the threshold of a great New Year's. In the meantime, we have some business to talk about here. Is this a deal closer for Mike Johnson to carry the gavel in this new Congress?
I feel so good about President Trump's strong and unequivocal endorsement. I did the same thing this morning right before him. So I'd like to, I sent out a little tweet to Mike Johnson thanking him and saying, look, the great news is the president-elect, President Trump, and I are on the same page once again. The reality is we're going to have a one-seat majority after the three leave. It's going to be a tough Congress. Really, this should be Mike Johnson's. He's earned the job. He's earned our trust. He's got my full support. But candidly, getting Donald Trump's support is going to really, really help close this deal. It's a deal maker. Without that endorsement, I was a little bit concerned for Mike Johnson. Now I feel very good about January 3rd.
Well, that's interesting. I don't think you're suggesting it was your idea here for Donald Trump to make that post, though the timing is rather interesting, Congressman. You're not the only one, though. A lot of people were trying to get to Donald Trump. A lot of folks were trying to say good things about Mike Johnson within the conference, including Jim Comer. And you can finish your statement if you want here. But Comer said just as recently as yesterday, we have 5 Republicans that won't commit to voting for Mike Johnson. Does Donald Trump bring them over?
I think he is so persuasive, and if he doesn't bring them all, I think ultimately he'll bring most of them. You have to look at the situation and say, if not Mike Johnson, who or whom? And then that big blank is out there. Who can get to that magic number? And it's not going to be easy. So we don't want to go 15 rounds. I was very active in the 15-round fight to get McCarthy made Speaker. I actually helped him in that. In fact, I was one of the last people to go and speak with Matt Gaetz and plead with him. And it actually went well at that time. Didn't go so well later. But the reality is we need a strong, unified message because, candidly, the way it works, the Democrats are watching on the other side of the aisle. If they perceive weakness, they will take advantage of that. And we don't need that. In order for President Trump to have a strong agenda carried out, the House is going to have to be that first step. Getting Mike Johnson elected as Speaker, I think, will clearly get that done. Then, of course, in the Senate, I think sledding will be much easier with that 53-seat majority.
Well, let's talk about the agenda for a moment then. I know that Donald Trump and Mike Johnson were talking about it at the Army-Navy game. I don't know that anything has been hammered out for sure. Will Republicans try to get their arms around the border first? Trump tax cuts second, or both at the same time?
I think you start now, of course, President Trump will choose his batting order, but I think it's smart to start with the easier tasks first. The border is easy because Joe Biden and this administration have done such a terrible job. It's porous, it's open. We've had millions and millions of illegals come in. We have got to fix it. And you've got the vast support of the vast majority of the American people. Big cities, rural areas, we have got to deal with this. It's a national security crisis, getting that done. I think the second thing should be foreign policy. I think Trump is going to be very strong in bringing peace to Ukraine and Russia. I think he will have great credibility with both Putin and with Zelensky. So I think that could be another strong early win. The Middle East is another story. It's a very tumultuous region, but Trump can take his best shot at that. I think he'll do well there. Taxes is going to be something else. It's going to be difficult. It's cumbersome. Our tax code is cumbersome in and of itself. We need to preserve these Trump tax cuts that I actually voted for in his first term. I think it's critically important for our economy. But I think we will take these in progression. We will test the waters. We will work through the process and hopefully have a good, strong first 100 days for President Trump.
There's a question about how wide to go on the matter of immigration, Congressman. We've been dealing with the idea of border security in a vacuum until Elon Musk brought up the matter of H-1B visas. These are, of course, the work visas that bring skilled talent from other countries. I talked to your colleague, Haley Stevens, Democrat from Michigan, about this. Here's what she said.
I'd say that Elon Musk maybe knows a thing or two about it, given his immigration history and given his employment base and given, frankly, the role that his companies are playing, not just here in the United States of America, but across the world. And so we need access to that talent. I think that could be very interesting. It'd maybe be a smart move of the Republican governing majority if they could do something for high-skilled workers.
Is she right, Congressman? And should work visas be part of this debate?
I have worked for work visas back when I was the ranking member, highest Republican on Homeland Security appropriations. This is something, we've got a great talent pool that sometimes we are educating in this country and then forcing away. I think Elon Musk is right on this. More importantly, President Trump backed him up on this. We've got a great talent pool. Let's face it, we are a nation of immigrants. We want it to be done legally. We want it to be done correctly. But we sure don't want to educate a great talent pool and then send them back to China or to India or anywhere else in the world where they can glean the benefits of our great educational system. So it is a process. Interestingly enough, the pushback we originally got was not from Republicans, was from pro-labor Democrats who actually tanked a lot of what Ms. Stevens was talking about in those hearings. So we took it right up to the edge many times and tried to get it done. It was labor Democrats who scuttled it. It was not Republicans.
Right up to the edge. Isn't that the truth? Congressman, we're spending a lot of time this week on Bloomberg talking about winners and losers from the year on Wall Street. And among the biggest gainers we saw are companies you know a little bit about. Constellation, Vistra, nuclear power providers that are suddenly in high demand because of data centers, because of the need for clean, renewable energy to run data centers that are apparently going to help pioneer the way forward when it comes to AI. This is something I know is close to your heart and you've worked closely on when it comes to utilities and nuclear power specifically. What will this new Congress do to make good on these bets that Wall Street is making, that growth is coming?
Yes, I'm excited. So our listeners know what I do. I'm the chairman of the Energy and Water Subcommittee of Appropriations. That funds the Department of Energy, funds all of the nuclear power and new nuclear technologies. This is what I do in Congress. I've had the privilege of speaking with Elon Musk about this. I've spoken with other folks. I've had one-on-one conversations with President Trump in his first administration, actually even on Air Force One, about this and wrote a paper for him. Chris Wright, the new incoming Secretary of Energy, very bright, very capable, very solicitous of nuclear. He has previously sat on the board of some nuclear companies. So I am bullish on new nuclear. But what does that mean? That means, Joe, we have got to get it right. There's a lot of designs out there. There are a lot of dollars out there. If you look at the fiscal 2025 bill that I wrote, I structured it on appropriations to basically continue to fund new nuclear, about $9 billion, $8.9 billion specifically for that. We've got to make a delineation, though. We need big new nuclear, like the Vogtle plant. We need to build big plants. We need to build smaller plants. And we're looking at microreactors. The bottom line is American technology in this area is superior. Our adversaries are moving ahead in this, meaning Russia and China, but our friends are as well. The French, the South Koreans, they are moving into this sector and doing a good job. The bottom line is, I think we need public-private partnerships. We need to invest in that. I do think the markets will respond to that. We have just got to make sure we pick the right technologies. If we pick the wrong ones, we will lose.
Well, that's a good answer, Congressman. I've got less than a minute. Is Donald Trump on board with nuclear?
I think so. Donald Trump is great. He's on all of the above. What I'm going to do is create an eighth energy caucus. I've got several in Congress. I'm going to call this the American Dominance in Energy Caucus. It's designed to parallel Donald Trump's Energy Council that Governor Burgum is going to chair. The reason we want to do that is make sure that all of the above means all of the above.
Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.